working on Paul's travel plan. Boy, I tell you what, I wish I hadn't started this. This has been a nightmare. Uh, I get so confused, bouncing around on these maps and trying to remember who said what, where, and when, and it's been tough. Next time I pull a stunt like this, I'm going to get it done before I start teaching it. When you're teaching it, you're under gun. You got to be done come Sunday, and I'm not done, but I hope I got enough to get us through the day. We need to do a little bit of backing up, though, first. We're talking about Paul's journey. We're through Apollos' being at Corinth. It happened while Apollos was at Corinth that Paul, having passed through the upper regions, came to Ephesus. Now, this is his third tour. He's come through Asia. He went through and strengthened the churches, and he's back into the far western portion of Asia, stopping at the city of Ephesus. You recall on his second tour, as he was going back to Jerusalem, he just stopped in Ephesus, maybe, I don't know, could have been a week, 2 weeks. It wasn't long, though. But then he had to get on to Jerusalem. It seems like to me that his schedule usually was try to get gone by Pentecost because he wanted to be in Jerusalem on the Passover. So he was always trying to get his foot out the door by Pentecost. And that's one of the ways you can earmark his travels, where he's at, because he tried as much as he could to get back to Passover, though he went several years without going. Aquila and Priscilla, what became of them? Well, I don't know. Maybe they went back to Rome. I don't know. Maybe they went back to Greece. I don't know. It's possible. I don't know where they went. They were from Rome. They had been run out of Rome. They were now allowed to go back to Rome. If it'd been me, I probably would have went home. Seen the kids, my mom and daddy, and those people, whatever. But I don't know. But they're out of the picture for the rest of Paul's travel. Paul's in Ephesus, and this is important to remember. He's in Ephesus on his third campaign. This is the last tour he'll take. He was planning on a fourth, but he's not going to make it the way he thought he would. When he makes his fourth trip, of course, he's going to be a prisoner of Rome. But at this particular time, this is his third campaign, and his main stop is going to be here in the city of Ephesus. Finding some disciples when he arrived, he said to them, "Did you receive the Holy Spirit when you believed?" Their response, "We have not so much as heard whether there is a Holy Spirit." It doesn't look like Aquila and Priscilla stayed there too long. I think they would have had more knowledge if they had have, but as you can tell, they were without knowledge. Apollos came and he taught the people incorrectly. He taught them about the baptism of John, not knowing the baptism of Christ. Aquila and Priscilla straightened him out on that matter. Apollos rather went on to Corinth. It could be that Aquila and Priscilla went ahead and left and may have went back to Rome at that time. That's the only way I can figure out why they were so ignorant of some of the basic tenets of New Testament Christianity. At any rate, they were without knowledge. So Paul went into the synagogue and he spoke boldly for 3 months, reasoning, persuading concerning the things of the kingdom of God. Well, some of the Jews, they were hardened. They would not believe. They spoke evil of the way being, of course, the church, before the multitude. They were getting up after Paul and picking his sermons apart. So he departed from the synagogue and took his disciples with him, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus. I don't know who Tyrannus was, but apparently he had a school there, and he let Paul come in and teach his doctrine in that particular school. So he started working out of that school. And this continued for 2 years, so that all who dwelt in Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jew and Gentile. This means that Paul spent 2 years and 3 months in all. Probably, I think he spent more than that, because before the riot forced him to leave, we're going to be told that Paul stayed there a while. How long was a while? And this is where you have to try to interpret what's going on. Was he there 2 years and 3 months in totality, or was he there 2 years and 3 months between the synagogue and the school of Tyrannus, and then a while longer? I don't know. Nobody knows. You guess is the best you can do at times like that. But it probably wouldn't have been too long, however long it was. So the two things you want to remember is the two lengthy stays that Paul had. One was in Corinth, of course. On his second missionary tour, he stayed there for 18 months. He returned to Jerusalem. He's now come back, and he stops in Ephesus, and he's been there for 2 years and 3 months, we know, at least that long. So this is where he did most of his teaching, and you can see why. In Corinth, he could reach out and touch everybody in Greece, and in Ephesus, he could reach out and touch the people in Asia Minor. The 7 churches of Asia we read about, Paul probably had a lot to do with the establishment and building up of those churches, in addition to the works he did at Ephesus. Of course, Ephesus was one of the 7 churches of Asia Minor. There were at least 9 in all, even though Revelation's only addressed to 7. We can name 9 out of the New Testament. But these were all being taught by Paul, along with the people of Ephesus. If you knew that Paul was just 30 miles over here in Ephesus, what are you going to do if you're a preacher or an elder? During the week, you're going to go over and listen to Paul. He's an apostle. He's somebody you can learn from. Sure, you're going to go listen to him. So the teaching of Paul reached far and wide during the time. He picked these 2 locations because they were advantageous. He couldn't go everywhere. It's not possible. You can't go into every little nook and cranny. It's just not possible. So you've got to pick out the most advantageous place where you can reach the most people, especially in these 2 cities, because people were constantly traveling in and out of them. It was always somebody coming through and leaving. And while they were there, they would be exposed to his teaching, and wherever they went, they'd take his teaching with them, and you spread the gospel that way. So that's the way Paul carried out his mission campaign. And this is how he writes in the in Colossians. He said he carried the gospel throughout the whole world. Well, when you calculate the time, it's 29 years. 29 years preached the gospel to every creature, Paul said. And of course, they mostly did it on foot. They didn't have TV or radio or internet. They did it by word to ear, mouth to ear rather. And they were very successful, accomplishing so much in just 29 short years. But this is how they did it. People were interested in the gospel. They wanted to hear it. They wanted to learn it. They wanted to know what it was Creator would have them to do. And they were hungry for the gospel. I know in India, so many times you've seen the same hunger. I remember one time I preached a standard 30-minute sermon, and when I got done, Ratnam looked at me and said, "Brother, you sick?" I said, "What? You sick?" "No, I ain't sick." "Well, how come you quit?" I said, "Well, I ran out of stuff to say." He said, no, we got to go at least another 2 hours. And I cranked up and continued on. But that's what you had to do. You had to go at least 2 hours. sometimes longer than that because people wouldn't let you stop. They started asking you questions. Uh, it's hot, 100 degrees, dry as a chip, drinking that water. But they wanted to know what God said. It was it was really gratifying. Very difficult, but it was very gratifying. But that's kind of, I suppose, the way it was when Paul was doing his mission trips. Of course, once everybody learns the gospel, the appetite calms down quite a bit. Uh, it becomes a matter of maintenance after you learn so much. It's more maintaining what you've learned, and I'm sure it's slowed down in these areas as well. Well, when these things were accomplished, Paul purposed in the Spirit that when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, he was going to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I have been to Jerusalem, I must also see Rome. So that's what Paul's plan is. He wants to finish this trip up, go back to Jerusalem by the Passover, and then he plans on going to Rome, and from Rome he wants to go on to Spain. Well, in the meantime, in order to prepare his way, much like John the Baptizer did with the Lord, as well as realizing he's got a problem in progress at Corinth, he sent two men, Timothy and Erastus, but he himself stayed in Asia for a time. That's the time. Is it in addition to the 2 months and 3 years, or is it a part of the 2 months and 3? I don't know. There's no way to tell. It doesn't matter. Timothy and Erastus, of course, he sent them to Macedonia. It appears to be, well, he did send them to Macedonia, but that wasn't really where they were headed. They were actually going to head for Corinth, and I'll show you that directly. But that was going to be their ultimate stop. Because Paul had written a letter and he wanted them to carry that letter to Corinth. Paul stayed in Asia for a time, 2 years, 3 months, and about that time there arose a great commotion about the way. This is Demetrius. Paul was eating into their profit margin. They weren't happy, and there was a riot that broke out in Ephesus. This is one of the marks of identifying time. For example, according to the government records, this commotion or this riot that broke out in Ephesus occurred in the spring of 57 A.D. Paul found himself with his back up against the wall. These people were going to hurt him. He was, I think, planning on going through Macedonia, stopping in Corinth, getting on a boat and sailing to Jerusalem. But now his plans have been interrupted because of this riot that's taken place in Ephesus. But we know it's 57 A.D. because of the records that are available to us. Where do we go from here? Okay, Paul's intention, that's what he planned on doing, but that got shot. Well, I got the whole thing down there. Sorry about that. We got the second campaign. I want to go back there because there's another letter we got to get to. The second campaign that lasted 18 months in Corinth. In Acts, we read, Acts 18, verse 18, Paul remained a good while. Then he took leave of the brethren. He sailed for Syria. Priscilla and Aquila were with him. And he came to Ephesus. He left Aquila and Priscilla there. What does that mean? Does that mean he left them at Ephesus, or that they separated because Aquila and Priscilla left Ephesus, catching a boat to go to Rome? I don't know. It's kind of hard to read. I've read it in the Greek, and I don't know. I don't know how to tell that. But it depends on how you read it. he left them there in the sense that he separated, or he left them in Ephesus. It can go either way. I would want to have to debate myself over it. He himself entered the synagogue. Then you ask, why didn't they go into the synagogue with him? Why weren't they involved in this part of his work? I don't know. Well, he entered the synagogue. He reasoned with the Jews. I think there's a possibility, though I think it's slim possibility, that it was at this time he wrote a non-canonical letter to the church at Corinth. Non-canonical means it's not extant. We don't have it any longer. It's gone. There's a letter Paul wrote to the Corinthians, then we don't have a copy of it. He refers to it in what we call 1 Corinthians 5 and 9. I wrote to you in my epistle. What epistle? There had to be an epistle that he wrote before 1 Corinthians. At least one, probably more than that, but there was at least one. And this is what he makes reference to in chapter 5 and verse 9. Did he write it at this time? This is about 52 AD now. Did he write it at this time? Personally, I don't think so. But if somebody thought he did, which a lot of people do, I wouldn't argue about it. It's just not worth it. But I'll give you another option in a moment I think is more plausible. Paul wasn't in Ephesus long. He had come from Corinth. He had gone to Ephesus. He hadn't been there long. Are we to suppose that someone already sent him word that there was trouble in the church of Corinth? I don't see how the timeline would fit. It could, but I just don't see how it would fit. So I don't go for the 52 date. I don't think that would actually be right. A lot of people do, though. People smarter than me. But he took leave of them, the people of Ephesus. He took leave of them, stayed a short time, I don't know, a week or two, whatever. I must by all means keep the coming feast in Jerusalem. He's talking, of course, about Passover. But I will return again to you, God willing. And he sailed away from Ephesus, went back to Jerusalem. So this is the end of the second campaign. What's my point? Up to this point, I don't think he's written anything to either Rome or Corinth at this particular time. That will come at a later time. Well, we keep going, and we emphasize Paul's stay at Ephesus. He came through Asia, and he was in Ephesus. This would have been in late year 54 A.D. It's important to keep up with all these dates. This is the time I think he wrote the non-canonical letter. He's been gone for a year and a half, 2 years. Problems in the church have arisen. And they know Paul's coming to Ephesus. So what happens? They send a couple representatives to Ephesus to tell Paul about the problems. And then there's some people, of course, in Ephesus who had been to Corinth and seen it firsthand. And I think at this time, when he arrived after he arrived in Ephesus, I think this is the most plausible time. He wrote the letter that we don't have. He wrote the letter that he makes reference to in chapter 5, verse 9 of 1 Corinthians, okay? He wrote 1 Corinthians in the year 57. This would have been in the early spring of 57, just after winter is when he would have written this one. In 2 Corinthians 12 and 2, for example, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know, or whether out of the body I do not know, God knows, such one was caught up to the third heaven. Now, Paul was in Jerusalem, or he was in Ephesus. No, he was in Macedonia at this time, and he wrote to them, telling them about something that happened 14 years ago. Okay, well, when did that happen 14 years ago? It was at the Jerusalem Council. Okay, about that time. When was that? That was back in the year 44 A.D. The Jerusalem Council happened not long after that. So you go back to the year 44 A.D., you add 14 years to it, what do? You come up to 58, the beginning of 58. So we're in the year 57, the early part of 57. Paul wrote this letter, which harmonizes with everything he says, what Dr. Luke writes in the book of Acts, also what Paul writes himself in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Everything syncs up. So this is the time. This is one you can be very definite about. Can't be that definite about all the letters, but this is one you can, because you've got uninspired documents and you've got inspired documents, and both of them tell us the same thing. And that's important because it also helps us establish when 2 Corinthians was written, which is going to be in the same year. He was written 1 Corinthians in the first part of 57. He'll write 2 Corinthians in the second part of 57. Okay? So he's in the city of Ephesus. He writes the letter, 1 Corinthians, in the early part of 57 A.D. We can learn that from an indirect source like 2 Corinthians 12 and 2, but we can also learn it, by the events that took place. Timothy and Erastus was sent to Asia. Well, I said a few minutes ago that their main objective was to get to Corinth in time. Why would I say that? Well, let's look at what the Bible says. In chapter 16, verses 5 through 11 of 1 Corinthians, Paul said, he wrote this from Ephesus now, I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia. I showed you where he was going to go up and down. For I am passing through Macedonia. I am intending to pass through. I'm not presently passing through, but I shall pass through Macedonia. And it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you, which he did, that you may send me on my journey wherever I go. He's going to leave Corinth and go to Jerusalem. That was the plan. For I do not wish to see you now on the way. Notice that. I don't want to see you right now. He's written a scathing letter in 1 Corinthians. He's gotten all over their toes. Hit him in the nose a few times. Timothy has carried the letter down to the Corinthians. They read what he had to say, and he said, I'm not ready to face you people right now. I don't want to talk to you right now. The reason was he's afraid something might be said that he didn't want to say. So he wanted to put some time between their reception of that letter and his arrival in Corinth. Okay? So he's going through Macedonia, preaching as he passes through Macedonia. But when I get there, I hope to stay a while with you if the Lord will let me. But I'm going to tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost. Well, he's staying this late and then traveling to Macedonia because he's not going to Jerusalem yet. He's going to do that the next year. At this time, he has no plans of going back to Jerusalem this quickly. So I'm going to stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, so we know what time that was, Pentecost to 57, and then he's going to start making his travel. He'll go to Troas, he'll go on over to Philippi, and down to Thessalonica, Berea, the other churches in that area. He'll talk to all of them, preach to them. It's been 6 months or so, and ultimately he'll wind up down in Corinth. Why would he do that? Well, he said, a great and effective door has opened to me here in Ephesus. A lot of opportunities, but there are also many adversaries. Okay, he knew that under the surface, the craftsmen were getting a little angry because he's cutting into their profit margin, preaching the truth. Now, he says, if Timothy comes, Timothy's coming. Notice, he says that in 1 Corinthians. If Timothy comes, Timothy's coming because Timothy's carrying the letter. If Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear. For he does the work of the Lord as I also do. Therefore, let no one despise him, but send him on his journey in peace. Timothy's going to come with a letter. I don't know how long he's going to stay. Paul may have told him. And then he's going to leave. And he's going to go on to other areas of work. Send him on his journey in peace that he may come to me. For I am waiting for him with the brethren. So that's the plan, according to what Paul says here. So when Timothy was sent into Macedonia, he was also going to go down to Corinth and carry 1 Corinthians. This was a hot letter. Take the letter, drop it off, spend a few days, and then go somewhere else. There's going to have to be a separation of powers for a moment, because the situation in Corinth was very dire at this time. It was a really bad situation. It's kind of like, the hostility that exists now in our country between the Muslims and Hamas and the Jews and also Christianity. There's a lot of hostility in the air. And it's, depending on where you live, of course, it's a challenging time for many people in our country because of those hostilities that have come upon us. And this is the way it was at Corinth. There were the false teachers. Them are the ones you really got to watch. Paul wrote to them about the man that had his daddy's wife. And he's told them, to clear that matter up. Well, these people, they're mostly ignorant. They got good intentions, but they're predominantly ignorant. The false teachers, on the other hand, they're different. These are mean people. These are liars and cheaters. They're there for the money. And this man, Paul, is interrupting the flow of money. And they're not going to be happy about it. So there's got to be a season of love. What do they call it? They call it a summer of love out when the Democrats burned up the West Coast. It was called the summer of love, like in Seattle. And this is what was going to take place here. It's going to be a summer of love. And then Paul would arrive at Corinth. He wasn't afraid to go, just needed some time for everybody to calm down. And sometimes you got to pick and choose your fights. And that's what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's going to get into when he goes to Corinth. Is it going to be a fight? Is it going to be war? Or is it going to be peace? He doesn't know. It depends on how they respond to what he's written. Yeah, he was Paul's man, therefore he was immediately the enemy of the false teachers. It's like a Christian is immediately a people who support Hamas. They hate people like us because we believe in a false God. They believe in the true God. We believe in the false God. They believe, that Allah, and we don't. These are radical Muslims, of course. All Muslims aren't that way. Most aren't that way. But there are those radicals. We've seen them in the colleges right now. That's radical Islam. And now, it's made up of Americans as well. Mostly women, I think, from what I can see on the TV. But it's got the same contempt. It's the same contempt. I mean, it's hate, man. I don't know how else to put it. It's really hate. And now this isn't all Muslims. Don't think I'm saying that because it's not true. I know a lot of Muslims, they're not mean people. But the radicals, these are the ones that have contempt, first of all, for Israel because they're smaller. You got to bump Israel, and then, you take the United States in stealth mode, not as radically as they tried to destroy Israel. But it was the same situation. And it was the same kind of people. These are radical Jews at Jerusalem. These false teachers are. They believe in the law of Moses. They believe in their God, Moses. And they're not really keen on Christ. I mean, he's okay, but he's no Moses. And there was a constant battle that ensued. And it was ugly. It was always ugly when religious battles take place. We'll probably learn more about that in the future. I think though it's safe in saying that Timothy carried 1 Corinthians with him to Corinth. He would drop it off, and then he probably went back to Macedonia. Guess. That's just a guess. I don't know. But I would, if I would have been him, that's where I'd have went, back to Macedonia. Okay, the reason for the letter. Paul wrote the letter. Why? Well, first of all, he's arrived in Ephesus. Somebody's there, and this person, Chloe. It has been declared to me concerning you, my brethren, by those of Chloe's household. Apparently, they trade back and forth. That there are contentions among you. Hey, Paul, they got problems in Corinth, man. They're divided up. You got denominations inside that congregation. This one says I'm a Paul. This one says I'm a Peter. I'm of Christ. The church is divided. You got various factions, and they're warring against each other. We got a problem, Paul. So here he is. He's got this infant church over there. He's only spent 18 months with it. It's still in its infancy. And they've got denominationalism breaking out in it. And Paul, of course, is going to be brokenhearted. He had great hopes for the church there at Corinth. And now it looks like his work may be for nothing. And he's excited about that. Then also in chapter 7 and verse 1, remember, he said, now concerning the things whereof you wrote to me. They sent him a letter because they had so many problems. And Paul spent almost half the letter answering their questions. So there's at least two reasons. Paul's arrived in Ephesus. Those of Chloe's house have told him, man, there's contentions. I mean, he spends 3 chapters writing about that in 1 Corinthians. And then he said, I also want to talk about these questions you folks asked me. And then he spends a large portion of the first letter to answer their questions. So he was like, he was chomping on the bit wanting to write 1 Corinthians because he wants to do something, say something to stop the problems that are going on at Corinth. This is something he would have been somewhat familiar with because he wrote the letter in 52, you remember, or rather 54, when he first arrived in Ephesus. Now he's been there for 2 years, and he gets all this information coming to him about all these problems arising. His letter apparently didn't do any good, so he's going to write 1 Corinthians, okay? And he's got to get it there. So who's going to carry 1 Corinthians to the Corinthians? Who else but his son in the gospel? He gives it to Timothy. Preach your way down to Corinth. Drop off the letter. And then you move on to greener pastures. And he would. If Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear. That's because of the hostilities that are there. When he arrives, hey, this is. Remember what Jesus said one time in a parable? Hey, this is the master's son. Let's beat him up and kill him, and they did. Well, now here you've got Timothy. Here's the master's son. Let's beat him up and kill him and take over whatever power or authority he's got. And Paul's saying, don't let them do that to this boy. You take care of him. He does the work of the Lord as I also do. Therefore, let no one despise him, no one hurt him, but send him on his journey in peace, that he may come to you. I am waiting for him with the brethren. So Timothy is gone from Corinth, okay? He'll be back, but for the moment, he's gone. And I think it's just because of the hostility. Paul didn't want him to stay there. He didn't know what would happen. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 19. How much time have I got? Huh? Go back. We'll, Lord willing, next Sunday we'll continue here. One more time.